If you're a kid, please make note of this. It's for your own good.
I don't need to say anything. This meme right here says it all for me. I love endgame memes.
Some of my favorite moments in a game are final bosses. I mean, with them being the final test of what the player has learned about the game, it's important for them to close the game out on a strong note. Despite this fact, there are some that pretty much go kaput. Whether they be overall mere shells of what they could have been, or have factors that get under my skin, there are some that I just don't enjoy fighting. Aside from the Golden 2 countdown rules, there won't be anything else taken into account. So, let's just start this mess. One of the biggest ways I can be left feeling hollow after a final boss is to have that boss be one of, if not the largest point in the game, and have the final result be either frustrating or underwhelming. Sometimes, like in this case, it's not enough to outright ruin a game, but it does leave a bad taste in my mouth. So yeah, the battle with Ares was built up as the big climax of the original God of War, and the whole reason you went on the adventure in the first place, and to be fair, the first phase is actually kinda cool. Ares does fight you with a multitude of attacks based off various aspects of war, and you have plenty of space to give him everything you've got, while rewarding you with extra health and magic, so the battle isn't unforgiving. But the part where I start to grow a dislike for this battle is literally everything after that. After the first phase, Ares sucks you into an illusion that recreates the incident of Kratos losing his family, so this phase is basically protecting illusions of Kratos' dead wife and child, which would be okay if the Kratos remnants didn't spawn non-stop and have super armor for when they attack. It doesn't help that the wife and kid die very easily, so don't be surprised if the remnants cause a game over in one fell swoop. And unlike the first phase, health and magic is not very plentiful, so while it may seem like there's an extra degree of welcome challenge, to me it's basically a chore that makes this part of the battle way more annoying and tedious than it should be. Trust me, near the end, unload all of your super gauge and all of the magic on the Poseidon's rage spell. There's no shame in doing so. And after Ares manipulates Kratos' power to kill those illusions, tormenting Kratos to see his family die again, the final phase begins, and it's by far the worst part. You're stuck using a giant sword for this part of the battle, meaning all your attacks are nowhere near as fast as they previously were, making it easy for Ares to counterattack. This part of the battle is basically a tug of war, meaning that whenever you deal damage to Ares, you get more health for yourself, and vice versa. The problem is that you deplete Ares' side of the bar at a snail's pace through normal attacks, but Ares can counterattack very easily and make the work you just did utterly pointless with just one move. The way you're speeding up this part of the fight is if you get a quick time event struggle with Ares and prevailing, which is a problem because the criteria to start one of these is very inconsistent. The game likes to pick and choose when it'll let you enter one of these, or it could just let Ares land cheap shots on you. Either way, anything is sliced. This is just a frustrating and poorly designed battle that has some overall good storytelling and started off fun, but just nosedive into oblivion as it went on. And that's just sad. I could use this segment to talk about the abysmal final boss of Sonic 4 Episode 1, but the more I think about it, the more I feel bad about another final boss in the series. Not to mention, while I still don't like this fight, my reasons are a little more personal. So instead, let's talk about Dark Gaia. Come on Unleashed, you were getting your foothold with the incredible Dragoon fight and showing a lot of promise with the cutscenes prior. What the heck happened here? Immediately, this fight looks like it'll be amazing with you getting to play as a giant Megazord and beat up a giant beast with it. But that dies off immediately once you see how badly the golem was implemented. And the controls for this thing are stiff and unresponsive, it overall moves incredibly slowly, and there's a delay to its punches and guards, so it takes a long time to get to the boss when you have to punch or guard incoming attacks, which can be very stingy even when you swear you pressed the right button at the right time. Not helping these is that when you get to Dark Gaia, the game has quick time events that beat out the boss for you that are really boring to watch. And when you go into speed sections with Sonic, you're on time limits that require you to be pitch perfect with your movements in order to not die. I get that's the final boss, but this is just one step too far. Really, this phase just drags because its structure is incredibly repetitive, with you doing this process 3 times, each getting more unfair than the last. It's pace killing, and I'm furious about that. But surely the second phase has got to be good, right? Well, okay, it's not as bad as the first, but it's not really that great either. You have to go around the shield to destroy the tentacles Dark Gaia puts out, while the boss himself fights Chip in the background. There's little to nothing that can hurt you in this phase, aside from the meteors, which are very easy to see coming, and the lasers the boss has, which come from the background. When your objective is focusing on something in the foreground, your instincts are telling you to look at the background at all, let alone at all times. I don't know who would be crazy enough to think that. And when you destroy the shield, the rest of the phase is just quick time events that own the boss for you, one of which will give your controller buttons a workout. And that's it, you win. Well, For a boss as built up as this, and after an amazing penultimate fight, this is an immense step down. You don't really get to interact that much with Dark Gaia himself, which is lame, but the poor gameplay segments bring everything down and cause the climax of the game to collapse in on itself. Oh, and I would like to know why the Wii and PS2 version has a better Dark Gaia fight than the HD version, despite the fact that the HD version is technically a better game, at least in my opinion. I don't know. And perhaps I'll never know. I'm pretty sure there's a song and dance that many of you know, but even after so much time, I still would like to know who thought the Titan Joker battle from Batman Arkham Asylum was a good idea. Like, really, Rocksteady? This is seriously the best you could think of for the finale of this game? I mean, not only does it not fit the Joker, who's always using his brains and surprises to get the better of Batman instead of brute strength, but they just happen to make the final boss another hulking monstrosity. This is a problem because you've been fighting so many of these Titan brutes throughout the game, and it has shown that it can provide some really creative bosses outside of this zone, so seeing them reuse the Titan brute trope is really disappointing. I'll give them a tiny bit of credit as at least they tried to make this battle different from other Titan brute battles, instead of just copy-pasting them onto Joker, like what they did with Bane, but I very much mean a tiny bit as the battle still plays out like garbage. When Titan Joker gets involved in combat, all he does is just swipe at you, which can be easily avoided by making like My Python and... And after each time this happens, he screws off and sends his minions after you, which is also disappointing considering they've been so plentiful throughout a lot of the game's bosses, and while it's fine fighting them normally, it's so much more bland when they're part of a boss battle, let alone the final boss. And after you get most of them, Joker will just spend his time admiring a helicopter, giving you a chance to damage him. This is repeated 3 times with no variation or extra ways to challenge you. The only thing that changes is the different minions that show up after each hit, but they do so little to shake things up, as they are easily defeated through the same method as all the others. Really, for as fun as this game is, and for a villain as famous as the Crown Prince of Crime himself, this battle is nothing more than a joke, and sadly not the funny kind. At least Batman punching him with an explosive gel fist afterwards was pretty sweet. So, the original Uncharted. It's okay, but I do have my issues with it. While the story was really good and exploring was fun, the game suffers heavily from a lot of stupid design decisions, and I feel they get summed up pretty well with the final battle against the talking Navarro. Uncharted 1's villains may be as engaging as a rock, but at least Eddie Raja and Gabriel Roman had some small ties to Nate and Sully respectively, to at least try to flesh them out a bit more. Navarro, on the other hand, has... nothing. He's just been on the sidelines to leave comments in occasionally, so when he hijacks the plot from Roman, you expect him to be a bit more interesting. But instead, he just spews out his plans to sell a virus as a biological weapon in the exact boring tone you expect it to be in. Things don't get better when you find out that the first 2 parts of the battle are literally more shootouts. Uncharted 1 shootouts are the worst part about the game. They always have you pitted against enemies with overpowered weapons and extremely good accuracy that spawn constantly, even after you've already dealt with more than 10 of them. And these shootouts in the final battle have their own brand of issues, in that Navarro will occasionally fire his shotgun after some time. These shots can severely damage you, if not kill you in one hit if you're exposed. And you might be, because the crates that give you good angles to pick off the enemies can be easily destroyed. And on some random QTEs that do nothing but make the fight more frustrating, and we have a mess of game design that happens before getting to Navarro himself. Even the final part of the fight is miserably designed. You need to navigate around these crates in order to get to Navarro and finish him off. And you better figure that out for yourself, because the game doesn't really enlighten you on anything, so don't be surprised if you get one-shotted from the slightest slip. And after some random QTEs that beat the boss for you, boom, you've charted Uncharted 1. Navarro, you are a worthless villain, if I have ever seen one. Despite my adoration for Fire Emblem Fates, I will say that I thought Conquest was the weakest route of the 3. I still do massively enjoy it, but I feel it does the most things questionably compared to the others. A more restrictive style of progression doesn't click with me as much as a more open-ended style that lets you prepare for tougher battles more, and the final boss can chomp on at least 30 slices of pineapple pizza. Jeez, it can be cruel sometimes. Everything prior to this final battle was rather smooth, with the occasional questionable thing here and there. But then the final boss comes and has to go and put a detriment into it. This is another one of those rush to the final boss and kill it before the enemies wear you down maps, which are a common staple for Fire Emblem, and I can roll with it when it's done well. Except Conquest's final boss, the Infested Takumi, does not do it very well. you're only relegated to a straight line on this map, which is not very big and packed with enemies waiting to ambush your butt, like these master ninjas who are always a chore to kill, mages who hit hard, and maids with a obnoxious staff range that can debuff or halt your enemies whenever they please. Not helping things is that on certain turns, the Infested Takumi charges up an attack which can cause a lot of chip damage to everyone on your team unless you're hiding behind cover that can be exposed via dragon veins. But they're also easily destroyable, so they won't get you very far. Combine this with the fact that enemies are spawning from all angles, and the fact that they can swarm you so easily, and we have a mess before we even start dealing with the Infested Takumi. But just like Navarro, if you reach the final boss, the fight is no better. The Infested Takumi can not only attack at 1 to 4 range, as opposed to a Yumi unit's usual 2 range, not only can counterattack regardless of who you use, but also completely tosses an improvement Fates made from Awakening's pair-up system out the window, in that a replica is fighting with the Infested Takumi, who will supply him with these crazy buffs that make pair-ups exceedingly broken in Fire Emblem Awakening. So dealing with him can be a massive pain, even with the Shadow Yato. I get that this is the final boss, so it has to be harder than what you've been dealing with, but casting one of Fates' many great steps up off to the wayside is seriously a step too far and just makes things even worse. And what happens after you beat this boss? Nothing. The boss just fades away with only words from the real Takumi thanking the Avatar for destroying his body. Very little important things happen in this fight, so they could honestly have just been placed in other chapters, especially the Garen fight prior, and have the same impact, or a better one. But it's so sad to see Conquest just give these things up over this atrocity of a boss at the last minute. Takumi deserves better. Even if most of the bosses in Crush 1 and 2 weren't very good, they at least had alright ideas. This battle with Cortex and Crush 2, on the other hand, is nothing but a giant question mark. The first thing wrong with this is that you're forced to use the jetpack. Putting aside how I don't like the jetpack, as its controls are befuddling at best and unmanageable at worst, it's a gimmick that's introduced at the very end of the game for just 2 levels, so you can't fully understand how it works before you get put into this high-speed chase. Yet in the face of the fact that because you're not that great at the jetpack, and will most likely slide all over the place hitting mines and meteors, this battle is actually a cakewalk. All you really need to do is hit Cortex 3 times and you win. And even with how finicky the jetpack is, there is nothing in regards to challenge here. Cortex doesn't attack you at all, even though he has a free hand to use his laser gun, and the meteors and mines only slow you down for a brief second. They don't hurt you. And you might think that this will give Cortex more time to get away, and you'd automatically have a better idea than the folks at Naughty Dog who approved of this fight, since if you get too far behind, Cortex will slow down or come to a complete stop and wait for you to catch up. The only way you can lose this fight is if Cortex successfully gets away, but this fight holds your head so much that it's incredibly unlikely to happen. As a whole, this final boss is just a train wreck thanks to the problems with the jetpack, and it's somehow managed to be completely laughable with how easy it is to beat in literal seconds. How do you do that exactly? By probably not giving a crap. That's how. I really want to talk about Azure Tracker Gunvolt 1 in a positive light, but some questionable decisions in the finale make it difficult to do so. After that unnecessary padding with the gems and having to fight this travesty of programming twice, what's it all come to? A final boss that makes everything not worth it. Starting off this poor excuse of a finale is the character himself. Asimov barely has any personality and screen time worth caring about. Apparently he founded the organization that Gunvolt works for and taught him what he knows about Acceptable, but for the most part the important stuff about him is more so told rather than shown, so it's really hard to care about his relation to Gunvolt, making his betrayal after you beat Nova really underwhelming. Oh, and he wants to destroy humanity because... cheese. Yeah, they don't explain it very well. And all that doesn't come close to how bad the actual fight is. All of Asimov's attacks inflict the chafe status, meaning if you get hit by 1 bullet, your electrical powers will be gone for 5 to 7 seconds, which doesn't sound that bad, but in that time frame, Asimov can let loose another attack, and either stack chafe statuses on top of one another, or just let loose his flash shield and take a quarter of your health down. And while his normal triple shots aren't so bad, the shots he lets loose when he hits half health are extremely annoying to avoid, and seem like they have highly questionable collision detection, especially that incredibly annoying circling shot drone. But all that is nothing compared to his strongest attack, Voltic Chain. The entire screen gets covered with chains that eventually become electrified and kill you in one hit. And even if the tip of your hair touches it, and even if you're at full health and in your most powerful state, boom, dead. And this is made even more painful because of one minor detail. The positions of the chains are randomized. RNGesus has complete control over where the chains are, and you have to make a beeline to the first incredibly open, yet incredibly small spot you can find to dodge it, even if it's at the top of the screen, which requires constantly jumping. And after all that, a brief discussion between the two ensues, and then Asimov dies, leaving the ending as kinda sappy, but I don't feel the full emotion it was trying to convey, because Asimov's character was handled poorly to the point where I couldn't get invested into him, and the damage this fight left on my sanity was just too much. It's an unfair and annoying fight that made beating Azure Striker Gunvolt feel all the more unfulfilling. What a shame that I talk about Sly Cooper again on a negative list, as I really do enjoy the series, especially the 4th entry, Thieves in Time. Out of all 4 Sly games, this is the one I feel perfected what the series wanted to be. Fun story, great character interaction, the most polished gameplay overall in the series, and a great selection of bosses. This game was overall a great experience that unfortunately ended on such a sour note. Now granted, this boss does try to be a little more experimental than other Sly bosses, which is okay, but man did it go in the wrong direction. Leaving out the fact that the boss in question, Cyril the Paradox, is a pretty lame villain all things considered, for his motivations are a little more than him throwing a temper tantrum. The fight with him is basically just one fest of quick time events. I wouldn't have a problem with this if it was done well and acted as a form of immersion, but guess what? The game gives you loads of time to hit each button that there is basically no immersion or challenge to be found here. I don't get the feeling like I'm part of a great duel through time itself. I feel like I'm just pressing buttons to make a cutscene continue. Nothing changes to the fight overall, and the sections of platforming and rail grinding add basically nothing. Considering how much fun the other bosses were, and the good build-up and fantastic atmosphere presented here, this one sadly stinks even worse than an actual skunk does in comparison. I'm hoping they can make a Sly 5 and help things out a bit, but that doesn't seem likely, and that makes me sad. Deciding on entries for this list made me realize something. Back when I made my old final boss list, there was one final boss I had faced at the time that is far worse than any of my old candidates, but I completely forgot about him when I released the video. However, the boss and the bad memories it supplied me with resurfaced sometime later. So Wallace, you may have slipped through the cracks years ago, but not this time. I mean, what was 2014 me even thinking? How exactly did I forget a battle so wrong? I don't know, but this box sucks regardless and I'm here to complain about it. For starters, the final boss of the original Ruby and Sapphire was another trainer called Steven Stone, who has a lot more screen time and development in both of them, and in Emerald, than Wallace. So the fact that in Emerald specifically, they randomly decided to axe him off for someone who's far less interesting is incredibly disappointing. Not to mention, Steven, a trainer with a decent variety of Pokemon, got replaced with another boss who uses water types. And to those who don't know, Emerald has a lot of water sections, water-themed villains, and a water-type boss you fought not long before this. Which, yeah, that's not tiresome at all. And when it comes to actually battling him, wow. They really went all out in making his team as annoying as possible. I know that this battle on the surface plays out like every normal Pokemon battle, but if you want a Pokemon battle to be infuriating, have the trainer utilize moves that make the player roll the dice in order to make the game move, have something that can potentially set up to make your life miserable, or have something that seems like it was Ivy or Eevee trained. I mean sure, his Whiscash, Wailord, and Tentacruel aren't too bothersome, but his Ludicolo has an awkward set of weaknesses and constantly spams Double Team and Leech Seed, meaning if you hit it while it has these set up and it lives, it can gain that health back. His Gyarados is extremely dangerous with Dragon Dance and Earthquake, and then there's this thing. I hate this Milotic. I know that Milotic in general is a rather decently tanky Pokemon, but something about this one in particular just seems borderline unnatural. Even when it comes to using the types it's weak to, and Pokemon that have great attacking power, it really overstays its welcome, especially since it has Recover for healing, and Toxic to stall you out. Hope you like being on the edge of a Toxic staller, because I sure don't! Oh, and it hits hard with Surf and Ice Beam, in case you were wondering. This battle is basically a culmination of everything that could go wrong in Pokemon battles. Even if you really prepare for it by doing things like choosing Trico for your starter and grinding heavily, this battle is never fun. Maybe that's why Steven was a champion again in Noras. Maybe Game Freak did realize that this battle was really a mistake. Anywho, I'm glad they stripped Wallace of his champion rights. I don't want to deal with a champion battle as awful as his ever again. Before we reach the top, here are some other final bosses I dislike. Gaia Muse from Tales of Xillia, the Hades Hand from Rayman Legends, Andros from Star Fox 64 3D, the Bitter Cold from Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Keys to Infinity, Metal Robotnik from Sonic 4 Episode 1, and Clockla from Sly 2 Band of Thieves. If I was going to talk about the Hyperdimension Neptunia series for the first time on YouTube, I really didn't want it to be in a list about bosses I dislike, but it's so sad that it had to be the case. Even though the games do have their share of problems, the creative world, fun stories, and lovable characters really drive me to keep on playing them and help me to get over the areas that they're weaker in. But there is one thing etched into my brain that really drives me through so many walls by just the sheer mention of it. The final boss of Rebirth 1, True Arfoire. Idea Factory. What have you done? Who thought that the design of this battle was the least bit acceptable? I mean, Rebirth 1 was already rusty in terms of bosses to begin with, but this boss is just mortifyingly awful. After fighting Arfoire so many times that you could count, the final battle with her just goes out of its way to include everything you should not include in an RPG boss battle. The first phase is similar to many other fights with her, but it does almost nothing to stand out for the others, as Arfoire barely uses any new attacks, and in fact, this one actually takes steps backwards for being way too easy. Arfoire might hit hard with a few attacks, but most of them don't hit very hard, and her defenses and HP are pathetic, meaning that you can easily beat her in less than a minute. But the torture is just beginning. Arfoire makes like Maleficent and becomes a dragon and jakes up everything way too much. Her HP and defenses are off the charts in this phase, meaning that you have to do a crap load of buffing to even get any progress done. And even if you perform a combo where every hit does over 1,000 damage, or even pull off an EXE drive attack, you're only going to deplete her HP by just a tiny bit. And her offense might as well insta-kill anyone who's not a CPU. And even if she hits a CPU, she will still do a crap ton of damage. But Arfoire's two worst traits are about to be brought up. Not only does Arfoire in this form have the durability of a wall made out of titanium and vibranium simultaneously, but she also regenerates her health and guard the entire fight. So with her offenses making you think about healing, she can essentially magically undo the damage you just did, especially when the game decides to be a jerk and let her have 2 turns back to back. And finally, since she's a dragon enemy, they gave her an attack called Dragon Raid. It covers the whole screen, hits every single party member out in combat, and does an inhuman amount of damage and inflicts several status ailments like poison, paralysis, SP attack blocking, and God knows how many others. And if you can believe it, there is no criteria for when Arfoire does this attack, so she can just yank this out as many times as she pleases. So say you spent the last 25 plus minutes getting her to around a quarter health and have her say nope, and have all your party members either KO'd or weakened enough so that they're free for the picking. That is not the player's fault! That's not challenge! That is lazy and incompetent design that just adds to the poor quality of this fight! I'm sorry for those who didn't want me to get this angry, but I think I've earned it considering how Arfoire pulled this dirty stunt on me multiple times, as well as the phases before and after this one are pathetically easy, this being the one time where one of the biggest problems with the game, its incessant leniency on grinding, was bent over and spanked until its butt was the darkest shade of red, and that my successful attempt to beat this phase alone took me 45 minutes to do! It's all the fault of bad design choices, and when I won, I was so tired that I needed to rest for a while. This is probably one of the worst designed bosses I have ever seen, and the damage it caused to my sanity was just so strong that I have experienced migraines and severe anger just thinking about it, let alone having to triumph over it. I still like Rebirth 1, but this boss truly made me feel like it built up to something that actively wanted to get under my skin. Well, Arfoire, you did it. You got under my skin and got to the top of the spot. Hope you're proud of yourself. I'm the Lightning Ripper, and despite how horrifyingly horrendous this boss is, at least the ending afterwards was pretty heartwarming.